Welcome to our third and final day of Labs Leaders Critical Connections. With an emphasis on options and opportunities for women and BIPOC communities in science, we will hear from three hands-on leaders. Please read their detailed bios on the conference website. We will hear from Brandon Andrews, Dr. Dorothy Jones-Davis, and Dr. Baindu Bayon. Brandon connects brands to consumers and influencers. He leads his company's work in technology and entrepreneurship. He is also a innovation fellow at the State Department and is the casting producer for Shark Tank. Baindu has a PhD in medical and molecular genetics with a focus on neurogenetics. She's a principal consultant on a major training project for the Small Business Administration on innovation research and technology transfer. She is also a past AAAS Science and Technology Fellow. Dorothy has a PhD in neuroscience from Michigan. Her past roles at NSF, NIH, UCSF inform her work, which is now as Executive Director of Nation of Makers. We will hear more about that work in her presentation. So let's start with Brandon. Thanks.
Well, thanks so much, Carla, and Rosalind Franklin Society. Congrats on another year of continuing to advocate for women and for BIPOC communities to have a place in business and science and technology. I'm Brandon Andrews. As Carla mentioned, among other things, I do run a nationwide casting tour for ABC's hit show Shark Tank through our social impact company Values Partnerships. In this role, in a pre-pandemic environment, I plan casting events that happen all around the country and meet thousands of entrepreneurs, primarily focused on making sure that the diversity in the audience watching at home is reflected in the entrepreneurs who are pitching on the show. The way that we do this is by going where the entrepreneurs are versus maybe having them go to the big civic center or convention center downtown. I want to go to the coffee shop in their neighborhood, or I want to go to the HBCU, or I want to go to the business school, or I want to go to the co-working space and find entrepreneurs in their neighborhoods where they are, see small groups of them, be able to build relationships with folks, but also give them an opportunity to pitch, to be on the show and potentially get in front of get their business in front of millions of people, and also potentially strike a partnership with one of our great sharks from the show. What I like to bring to Shark Tank is what I really like to bring to every thing I work on in the business space or technology space, and that's really being intentional. I think with Shark Tank, we call it our Shark Tank Diversity Tour because we're seeking more diversity in terms of the kinds of companies that we have on the show, and also more diversity in terms of the types of entrepreneurs, the communities they come from, the stories they tell, the zip codes that they represent. Personally, I grew up in a small town in South Alabama, and I honestly didn't know much of anything about entrepreneurship or business growing up. I'd heard of being a business person, but I certainly didn't know what business people did. And I had to wrap my mind around having my own business, being an entrepreneur. So I think what we do, making sure that the diversity in the audience watching at home is reflected in the entrepreneurs pitching on the show, hopefully that helps inspire not just the next generation of entrepreneurs, but the current generation of people who have ideas and want to start a business, but just need to maybe see someone who looks like them, someone who sounds like them, someone who's from a similar place that they're from, who's from their part of the country, who's from their city. Seeing someone that they share those attributes with hopefully will provide inspiration. And I think it's incredibly important that as media, as folks that work in the space, that we're providing those opportunities to inspire the next great entrepreneur to come on the show. One thing that I think is incredibly important, whether we're talking about Shark Tank, the television show, or we're talking about investing in the investing world, or we're talking about starting a company, is making sure that whatever audience you're trying to reach is fully reflected in the folks that you are talking with, in the people that you're building the company with, or doing the project with, and of course in the people that are providing the funding for the project or the company that you're building. Outside of Shark Tank, I'm also an entrepreneur myself. I'm co-founder of a tech company called Gauge. It is a mobile market research platform where we connect real people that have cultural expertise with brands to help them avoid mistakes and hopefully make better decisions, delivering better products and services and more relevant campaigns into the market. I always tell these brands the same thing I tell myself when I'm thinking about Shark Tank. It's be intentional and make sure that as you're looking to build whatever your next product is, whatever your next service is, or as you're looking to make your business decision, make sure that the people that you are talking to about building it, make sure that the team that you have building the product or service, and then certainly make sure that the vendors that you're using are reflecting the audience, reflecting the demographic or psychographic groups that you're wanting to reach. And when you do that, it's going to automatically be have a better chance of being more successful, certainly than it would otherwise. When we talk about diversity, when we talk about women, when we talk about BIPOC communities, and we talk about entrepreneurship, there is an inherent opportunity to reach new markets. There's an inherent opportunity to engage people that haven't historically been engaged, and there's an inherent opportunity to find new and better ways, new and better approaches to doing things. If you look at Shark Tank and the companies that have done well on the show, you look at companies that are female-led, and they're among the best performing companies on the show. If you look at the sharks themselves and you look at the top 5 top performing, top revenue generating companies in the history of the show, all of those companies were invested in by either 2 female sharks, Lori Grenier, Barbara Corcoran, or Daymond John. Daymond John actually has the top investment in terms of revenue generated in the history of the show, a social impact business called Bombas, a sock company. But if you look at the top 20 businesses that have generated the most revenue in the history of Shark Tank, at any given time, Lori Grenier probably has 10 to 12 of those top performing, top revenue generating businesses. And to me, when I look at that, it says, this is what women, this is what BIPOC communities, this is what diversity can do when people from diverse backgrounds are put in a position to be able to make investment decisions, to be able to bring their expertise, to be able to bring their knowledge, to be able to bring it, to be able to bring their ability to calculate risk and accept risk, bringing it to an investment scene, whether it's, and I think that applies whether it's in the small business and startup space like Shark Tank, but also I think it also applies to project management and to nonprofit opportunities as well. And so as we're thinking about diversity and bringing more women, bringing more BIPOC entrepreneurs and leaders into these spaces, it's not just something that is a nice to have, it's something that is absolutely a business imperative. And as we can see from Shark Tank, again, you look at the top 5 companies in the history of the show, companies that have generated the most revenue, all of them have been invested in by women or people from BIPOC communities in terms of the sharks that have made those deals. Looking ahead, I think it's critically important for media, and we have a role to play in telling your stories, making sure that we're connecting with organizations like this one, and connecting with members and connecting with people like you to ensure that we can accurately portray how brilliant you are and how much value you have to add to whatever space you may be in. I think, again, whether it's this Rosalind Franklin Society or another organization, being intentional about providing resources and bringing women and people of color into these spaces is where you start the conversation and where you start the work. And then lastly, of course, if anyone is ever interested in Shark Tank, or if you're interested in sharing your cultural expertise on Gage, feel free to reach out to me, and would love to connect with you. With that, I will turn it back over to Carla. Thanks so much for having me today. I hope that all of you, if you are an aspiring entrepreneur, take the opportunity to step out on faith and try something new, build something, and certainly don't let your background or your knowledge previously stop you from moving forward with whatever that dream might be.
Thanks so much, Brandon. We will now hear from Dorothy about her incredible opportunities and her work with Nation of Makers. Dorothy?
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Carla, and for inviting me to be a participant in this great panel. Again, as you said, my name is Dorothy Jones-Davis, and I'm the Executive Director of Nation of Makers. And we're really a national nonprofit, and our mission is to support the full range of organizations that impact makers. And we do that in a number of different ways: by building community, encouraging connections, broadly sharing our resources, facilitating funding opportunities, engaging in policy development, and overall just advocating for what's known as the maker movement. So you might be wondering, what is a maker? So a maker is a person or thing that makes or produces something. That sounds very simplistic, because it really is. It's really the spectrum of creatives, artists, entrepreneurs, innovators. Anyone who makes a thing is a maker. And that's from, ages 2 or whenever you start to make things, all the way to 102 or older. And a makerspace is really a place where those people that have those shared interests, often in computing or technology, can gather to work on projects while sharing ideas, equipment, and knowledge. And that's the definition that the New Oxford American Dictionary gives. But I always say, it's not just computing and technology. Really, it's the whole spectrum, everything from the arts all the way to very technical math, science, and STEM subjects. Really, when you look at a makerspace, I have a lot of images here of what you think of. And often people think of that first left corner where you have a bunch of tools, and that's true. That lots of makerspaces have tools. But what they may not realize is that makerspace is also a place where you can do biology. There are lots of community biology makerspaces. So the second image there shows some pipette men and other tips for pipettes and other reagents, and an incubator in the background. We're very proud of our community biolabs. They're places that you can learn skill sets. So the gentleman in the third window, he's learning how to solder for creation of a drone that he's working on. So it's a place that you can produce either small ideas or scale up to larger things. I went to visit a children's makerspace called the Catallator, and they have an empowerment station. So makerspaces are definitely places that we can empower ourselves and others and communities to really come up with great solutions. They can also be places where, you make things like textiles. There's a woman on a loom. Children can learn STEM skills. My daughter's one of the people in that little picture down there with the 3 little adorable children. We also have, spaces where you can learn trade skills. This is a makerspace in New Haven that is actually working with young apprentices to learn, traditional crafts of woodworking and other types of making. And it's also a place where we can solve really, really important community problems and projects. So in the last picture, it's some folks working with Magic Wheelchair, which is an organization that creates costumes for kids that are building to try to to address a need that children may have to have a typical Halloween costume when they're wheelchair bound. We do a lot of work with assistive technologies. So really, maker spaces are places that people come together. And when people come together, great things happen. And I think one of my favorite stories actually of what makers do and how we support makers really came out of the pandemic itself. So we're still in it, so I can't say we're past it. But as you recall, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a need for masks that were not KN95 or N95 masks that has changed recently. But we're interested in having cloth masks, and so one of the things that makers were able to do is make large amounts of cloth masks and other personal protective equipment. And what we found is that we had thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, almost hundreds of thousands of makers that got together to make different items. And we had over 72 million pieces of PPE that were produced across the world, in a survey that we had taken to figure out how much PPE was being produced by makers. And that's really when people come together and want to solve a problem in their community. In this case, the community was the entire world. Great things can happen. So who is our community as Nation of Makers? Well, we're a deep and wide community of creative organizations, thousands of those spaces, events, and organizations that engage makers, problem solvers, and innovators. And we give them the tools and technologies really to create anything that they can imagine. So we bring people together within diversity of communities to solve problems within their communities by giving them the tools and technology to do so. And so we have, again, lots of maker spaces. They look all different ways, maker spaces, biospaces, hacker spaces, you name it. Also events. So these are events that may pop up for a short time. Many people have been to a maker fair or a maker meetup or a hackathon. And we also support within our communities lots of maker organizations, nonprofits, for-profits, even school systems and federal local agencies that have, maker activities happening. People are often surprised, but most of our federal agencies actually have some sort of maker effort. And therefore, often the employees of those agencies, as much as it is a service to the people that they serve. We also serve libraries, which provide open access to those tools and technologies, museums, manufacturing organizations, you name it. So how do we do this work? What are we doing to engage the diversity of makers? Well, it's kind of a holistic approach. And, as a Black woman myself, I very much believe in the sort of idea that we need to have a diversity of makers. Now, I'm probably not convincing anyone that's listening to this right now, because I think most people in this audience might be aware of the fact that we need a diversity of people to solve a diversity of problems. But there are people in our country and in the world who may not realize that we do need to take that approach. And so for me, it's personal. I personally think that, my viewpoint, the viewpoint of others that may not look like me and others that do look like me, need to be part of the conversation. And part of that is that when we don't have people at the table to think about a diversity of problems, we don't end up with a diversity of answers to those problems either. So those problems never get addressed, and we don't end up coming up with great solutions for them. So really, for us, it's really around a holistic approach of bringing together folks and being intentional with the work that we do. It really starts with what we call our core principles. And so at the beginning of Nation of Makers and our first convening together, we actually came up with a series of core principles that really talked about how we wanted to make an inclusive culture for the maker community. And we believe that we're stronger and actually more sustainable as a community when everyone is welcome. And that doesn't matter your age, ability, race, religion, ethnicity, sex, gender, sexual orientation, citizenship, veteran status, marital status, parental status, level of education, or socioeconomic class. You belong, and you are welcome to make whatever the solution is to the problems, to bring your problems from your different communities and to help work together to come up with solutions to those problems. And so to do that, we do believe that, everyone needs to be safe, supported, heard, encouraged, and respected, and have access to those resources. And so we do a lot of work to actually create that access, including, trying to make sure that we're respecting the safety and well-being of the entire community. and that we're doing this as an ongoing effort. So we have our own Maker project, which is this whole effort, which is trying to iterate and make ourselves better all the time. So really, as I said, it's that holistic approach that starts with our core principles and our intentional approach. It also continues with the way that we run the organization. We have a number of community-led micro communities. One is our culture and inclusion working group. We have a number of different working groups around data, around libraries, around different special sort of interests. But one of our most wonderful working groups is our culture and inclusion working group, which is specifically focused on intentionality around making sure that our organization and our community is always inclusive. And that group is actually the group that came up with those core principles that help govern our organization. We also have a BIPOC Makers Collective. This was just founded during the pandemic in 2020 out of a need to kind of come together and say, we have all these incredible BIPOC makers that are out there, Black, Indigenous, people of color, that are doing all types of creative work, and that there's a need for a support community and a community that's really pushing the boundaries of what BIPOC makers are able to do within their communities. We're also very intentional with who we showcase at our conferences and how we run our conferences, our annual convenings. So we each year have a conference called NOMCon, Nation of Makers Convention, or Nation of Makers Conference. It's a maker leadership conference, and we were very intentional at the first NOMCon to really gather together folks to start having these conversations. This is where our core principles came from, and we had an unconference on making liberatory spaces that involved a diversity of spaces, different in ability, different in sexual orientation or gender or race, different organizations that were specifically focusing on making at an intersectional point. And so we continue those conversations with those organizations as leaders within our community that continue to help us derive best practices that we then can disseminate to our community to keep this work going. We also have our Capitol Hill Maker Fair, which happens in the halls of Congress usually each year. This year and last year it was, of course, virtual. But it's our chance to talk to our congressional leaders about the work that the maker movement is doing. And we really are intentional to make sure that we are taking a diverse perspective on that. So what does that look like? That means that we're making sure that we have people from all corners of our country, right? That we have people from all different neighborhoods, all different types of making that are able to share what they're doing and what that valuable impact is. So that's an economic impact, that's an educational impact, that's a social impact. And we try to help them quantify that so that they're able to articulate that to our congressional leaders. We also think very thoughtfully about the partnerships we intentionally engage in. A lot of the work that Nation of Makers does is through partnership with other amazing organizations. And so we're always looking for new partners. If you're listening to this and you want to partner with Nation of Makers, we're happy to have you. But one of some of our favorite partnerships that we have going are our HBCU Making and Innovation Showcase community partnership. Really love working with the HBCU Making and Innovation Showcase. Each year there's a showcase that happens that showcases different maker projects. Brandon also has been a part of that. And so we've really enjoyed, being a part of that. We also have a number of tribal partnerships. We work with ACES, which is the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, to try to promote the work that we're doing and to try to engage Native American scientists and engineers in the work of Nation of Makers. We also often partner with Navajo Technical University. They've been incredible partners, actually hosting the first Maker Fair on a tribal nation, which is incredible. So just really amplifying the work that's being done in traditional maker communities and communities of color. We also are proud to be a part of the Field Building Collaborative, which is a collaborative of folks that are coming together around education and trying to make sure that education and maker education is used not just in communities that have in tremendous economic resources, but that they're available in all communities, because we do know that maker education and hands-on project-based learning really ties to very strong STEM skills and STEM career choices in the future for all students. And we want to make sure all students have access to that and not just the ones that have the access to the resources. And so we're trying to provide those resources. We also are thrilled to work with the US Department of Energy. That may seem like an odd place to think about diversity, but we need everybody in the world to really work on these energy challenges because, of the tremendous impacts that things like climate change have had and how they change the way that we harness energy and the way that we need to innovate around energy. So we're very proud to be what's called a power connector for the US Department of Energy's American-made challenges, and worked on the Solar Prize, the Geothermal Collegiate Competition, and most recently the Inclusive Energy Innovation Prize, which is such an exciting prize because it actually targets solutions for diverse communities, and specifically communities that have been overlooked or marginalized, and trying to figure out, okay, what are the questions there around energy, and how can we innovate and utilize individuals within those communities to create, partnerships, to create opportunities for individuals in all communities to innovate. And that prize is actually open. So I just want to put in a quick plug to definitely Google that if you're interested, because it's an ideation challenge, which means if you have no experience in energy, but just a great idea for your community or a community that's diverse, we want to hear it. The US Department of Energy wants to hear it. And we're really excited to work with those innovators, those ideators, to create a pathway to allow their ideation to become a reality and for them to create an innovation that can change their community. So we also really work with young maker leaders. And one of the things we're really proud of is our partnership with Makers for Change and a specific project called Inertia, which was really a wonderful idea that came from a young woman, Karina Popovich. And she just said, what if we showed girls and young women what an engineer looks like? And I was like, yeah, that's great. We can, put up pictures of women in engineering. And she said, no, what if we just put up a mirror? Because they're the engineers of the future. And I was like, okay, that sounds cool. And so she went ahead and she, came up with this entire idea. As a mentor for her, I helped with some of the, just trying to connect her to some people for funding. But it was this amazing mirror pop-up, but STEM focused in Washington Square Park in New York City. And she had, I think, tens to hundreds of thousands of people go through that exhibit. And some of the pictures and videos that they were able to capture of young ladies, and she had a bunch of STEM graduates, herself included, and also some STEM students there to show, hey, I'm a girl, I'm an underrepresented minority, I'm in STEM. And as someone who has a neuroscience background myself, I was just, so touched by how many girls really, just hadn't thought of themselves that way. And then when they see themselves, it was able to resonate with them. So just really trying to do all of that work. So a lot of our work is really around building the community, sharing our resources widely and the resources of communities all around the country, and educating the community about the maker movement and the power of making, really pointing to the diverse stories of makers all around our country, and really shaping policies that help to further maker education, STEM education, all of the types of invention education and innovation education that goes into producing the innovators of the future. So I just want to say thank you again to the Rosalind Franklin Society for having me. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at dorothy@nationofmakers.us. And it was wonderful speaking with you today.
Thank you, Dorothy. I know I'm inspired. But let's go on to our next presentation. We will now hear from Baindu about her work.
Thank you so much for having me speak today. It's an honor, and I have learned so much from the other presenters, and just want to talk a little bit today about the importance of STEM entrepreneurship in academia. My background is also overlaps with neuroscience, neurogenetics, but over time I moved into the innovation space, both as a consultant and as a startup founder myself. Something that comes up often is the idea of innovation culture. And I think what is often um, missed is that everyone doesn't have the same opportunities to be immersed in a so-called innovation culture. We know that STEM affects every aspect of our lives. And now that we're in the midst of a pandemic, we've turned to epidemiologists and virologists for solutions. And when we don't see patterns in certain regions, we look to experts, right? And so we know that these experts and inventors can produce amazing outcomes for us, such as developing a vaccine when we need it. And so we know that we need innovators to develop solutions to really pressing problems, and that the businesses or companies who can deliver those solutions can become very economically impactful. And so the ability to allow all people from all backgrounds, as has been previously stated, the most diverse backgrounds is critical to making sure that these problems can be solved. So we focus on ideas around reducing barriers to participation in the innovative process. And this can be targeted at the university level. So academics absolutely can play a role in building economic culture and filling this so-called innovation gap that represents a lost opportunity. And it builds a discriminatory drag on our economy, honestly. So we try to think about different ways that not only we can allow people from diverse backgrounds to participate in innovation culture, but what universities and other academic centers can do to enable individuals. So being an enabler of startup success can come, again, from the academic setting. This would require leadership and support from the university. So that means, offering courses in technology transfer and really inoculating an entrepreneurial spirit among the young people, or typically young people, on a college campus. An example is that, MIT is well known for being a hub for STEM-related startups, and they've been able to churn out tons of patents at the student level. Columbia University, Purdue University researchers have been able to spin out tons of companies. And a similarity that a lot of these universities have is that the concepts around entrepreneurship and commercialization are embedded in the curriculum and the course offerings that expose folks who are from backgrounds that maybe never exposed them to scientific inventors or folks in the tech fields that go on to start companies. It also requires support from alumni, so building that really strong alumni network that we're seeing at minority serving institutions now. We're starting to see that really, really building our HBCUs as well. That alumni network is what enables folks who are leaving that institution to then go out, find their group of folks that can support them and introduce them to high wealth individuals and enable their startup to progress. Also, the size of available research funding is a huge enabler of startup success. So some of the institutions I mentioned, like MIT, Columbia, or Purdue University, have really large budgets, and they have resources that maybe some of the other smaller institutions or minority serving institutions may not have to be able to get folks going who are interested in this space. There are also, many different types of resources that innovators need, including small business research and development. It takes more than just your technical expertise to start a company, start a project, start a business, and to really get things going from, so-called bench to bedside, if you're talking about therapeutics, or, a basic idea into the hands of a customer. And again, being able to give young folks the access to some of that business acumen early is important in that there's a great opportunity there to do that at the academic, at the institution level, at universities. Also being able to understand technology transfer. So oftentimes there are certain groups of people who have more access to this type of knowledge and training. If you are not savvy at a certain stage in your academic career, you may not learn about how patents are applied for, how they're received, how technology transfer works when an innovation is spun out of a university. And so you see some disparities there, and we would love to see that become more universal at the university level, understanding how to develop proposals, right? Innovators need to be able to pitch their ideas and their innovations in writing, as well as pitching in person. And so being able to build on those skills, again, is something that can be taught at the university level in a way that the academic environment could be a building zone for our next innovators. There's a huge impact that intellectual property plays. Companies that are able to get patents have a clear advantage for future funding. But there are barriers even to patenting, right? And the impact, there are financial setbacks, right? So the patent process is an expensive process. And it is a process that not everyone, maybe have the funds to participate in right as well. And so some of that becomes a limitation on who even gets to participate in that process. So for some companies and some founders, it's not as easy as, well, why didn't you patent this, or go out and get get intellectual property protection, because there are financial implications. If we could create this greater diversity, even in patenting, we could achieve greater diversity and participation in the entire innovation space. Venture capital is obviously one of those things that's not equally distributed among less diverse teams and more diverse teams. And we want to see folks, again, from all backgrounds have access to this economic advantages that will produce more patents from different universities. Funding for startups can come from several different sources. Friends and family is a round that is often discussed when talking about funding. And this round has more recently become a controversial round, because just the notion of having access to friends and family with the amount of money set aside that they could take a risk on a very groundbreaking, game-changing innovation becomes much lower when you don't have access to individuals of high wealth, and you don't have access to that sort of network. Angel investors, individuals who provide capital for a business or a startup, usually want something in return in exchange for convertible debt or ownership equity. And again, this requires relationships. And lastly, I mentioned venture capitalists, again, people that provide this large amount of capital in exchange for equity stake. These are individuals that some folks from certain backgrounds and will not have access to, because they're not in their networks. And so being able to start at the academic level, being able to start at the university level is so critical for helping folks build that network out, so that by the time they get to the stages where they're wanting to really scale up, they have access to some of the folks who can really fund their ideas. The small business program administered by the SBA, or Small Business Administration, is one of the mechanisms that folks at many different levels can use to start. It's a way to get access to non-dilutive funding, again, where the federal government funds your innovation, doesn't take equity from your innovation. And again, there can be partnership with universities. And so having students or very early stage investigators having access to these funds will be, well, it currently is and will continue to be one of the main starters or equalizers for companies who, again, lack that network to get funding in other ways. We also see some of the same trends with this type of funding. You see large innovation hubs such as Boston, Los Angeles, in DC, of course, the Bay Area, and other areas that are just more commonly churning out these small businesses. We also want to see those smaller innovation hubs grow, right? A few are listed here. You see smaller micropolitan areas that are growing in research innovation, and it is because they are anchored by research universities. Entrepreneurship as a whole highly affects outcomes for families and folks that are in science and related fields. Children who come from high income families are 10 times more likely to become inventors than those from below or medium income families. And so it's very common to see, my grandfather was an inventor and my mother was, and I am now. You start to see these gaps persist. Even among children that have the same math test scores early in childhood and the same types of, so-called early predictive measures, these suggest that the gaps are driven by differences, not just in environment, and not just in their ability to innovate, but in their environment. And so exposure to innovation during childhood can have significant causal effects on children viewing themselves as inventors, being able to, as was said, look in the mirror and see themselves as someone who could participate and innovate in the innovative space. And so academia, not only at the university level, but at the K through 12 level as well, can also contribute to our commercialization ecosystem. Being able to train students in the fields of entrepreneurship, especially in science and technology, also builds other skills that are just helpful in life, right? So you might be thinking, well, everyone can't be an entrepreneur, everyone can't be an inventor, which may or may not be true, but learning life skills, learning, enhancing creativity, being able to develop problem-solving skills, obviously dealing with rejection, and being able to boost leadership qualities are all things that students can benefit no matter whether they decide to become an inventor or not. Again, being able to access financial capital is really the barrier here. And being able to, compete for funds, not based on where you're from, your zip code, your socioeconomic disadvantages and other biases is huge. Whites are 3 times as likely to become inventors as Blacks in America. And 82% of 40-year-old inventors, according to who is getting patents today, are men. And so you see this gender gap as well. Even though it is shrinking gradually, it's going to take a long time before we truly see equality. And so this lack of capital is further exacerbated in times of crisis, like we witnessed during the beginning of the pandemic, where you saw Black-owned businesses, close at a high rate as compared to their counterparts, and not being able to have capital to fall back on, and not being able to recover from these instances. And so the same type of trend is seen for women entrepreneurs. It is more difficult for women to secure financing from equity investors. And we want a good place to start is to get our young women, our girls, involved in this pipeline early so that they have access and, again, time to build their networks. We also know that it's not the innovators themselves who have to change, right? The system around them has to change. And what I encourage is being able to create environments that nurture entrepreneurship in more diverse founders, right? So being able to center women, being able to center Latinx founders, Black founders, and guarantee that they have a seat at the table and a voice in the room. It's not as much anymore to just be visible, although visibility is impactful. We want to kind of push the mark on that and require that there is a guarantee that folks from underrepresented groups will be heard, will be paid, will be valued in the room, and we want to absolutely uplift, tell the stories of entrepreneurs who have received funding, right? It is important for other entrepreneurs coming up to see folks who look like them on both sides, right? Not only the folks who are inventing and starting small business, but the people who are willing to invest their money in their innovations. And so some of that will require opening up your virtual Rolodex and sharing access to high net worth individuals with women, with Black women, with Latinx founders, being able to share those resources so that they have access to those relationships and have access to folks who can help them in the next stages of their journey. Successful founders have, business and management skills, negotiation prowess, and have that powerful network. And again, something that can be built upon starting at the academic level and then taken out into the community and into these environments. Individuals born to wealthy parents obviously have access to those individuals and access to their pockets, so to speak. And so again, a major goal is to start folks off at the college university level, be able to shape those students' views of what they want to do with their life, how they view innovation, and how they view themselves as a part of the innovation space in the United States is going to be really important. So some things that you can do to get involved now is looking around and seeing, do you have an innovation ecosystem around you? If not, can you be a part of building one, right? So there's a wonderful framework for future innovation put together by the Lemelson Foundation. It talks about supporting inventors and entrepreneurs so that they can create value from their ideas and turn them into products and businesses. And this also feeds back into the prestige and the view of the university that spins these companies out. And then again, these academic innovation institutions become a breeding ground for churning out some of our greatest inventions and greatest companies. Universities can also put into place these entrepreneurship training programs, understanding some of the very first basic steps into starting a company. Accelerator programs, being able to partner with other nearby institutions that teach some of the methods to identify a problem that you could potentially solve with your technology. Encouraging entrepreneurship through these programs, maybe partnering with business programs or introducing certificate programs early on to get all students on board with thinking about using their education to invent things. Intellectual property training, again, to keep folks familiar and understanding how to protect their ideas and their product and truly valuing their ideas, understanding that the things that they think of truly have a value and that everything that they use, all technological advances they enjoy now were at some point an idea that someone had that other folks believed in. Prioritizing engaging faculty and trainees from underrepresented populations, having dedicated staff or resources that are focused on targeting communications to potential diverse awardees, making sure that there's a greater emphasis in creating more inclusive paths for women, underrepresented minorities, first-time entrepreneurs, and the communities that aren't benefiting yet from the innovation economies around them, right? So it's not just something that's occurring around them or to them, but something that they can actually be involved in. And so if that is the true diversity that will fuel innovation, and academia can truly be a part of it. And so I like to end by encouraging folks to just start. If you have an idea, or you know of folks that have ideas that you think could solve problems, being able to look at some of these options that I've named, particularly looking into the SBI or STTR programs from various federal agencies as a way to get non-dilutive funding and to kind of jumpstart your technology to the next level. And I'd like to thank you, and feel free to follow me on Twitter. And thank you so much to RFS for having me today.
Thank you so much, Baindu. I'm breathless listening to you. I hope you have all enjoyed this as much as I have. Thank you all, our speakers, for such great presentations. And I really appreciate the insider look at options and opportunities for women and underrepresented minorities. I hope you also have picked up on the important notions of creativity, entrepreneurship, and innovation. And on to our next session, the future of biotech. Thank you all so much.